1979 was arguably the most significant year in terms of Iowa's humanitarian heritage. There was Governor Ray's leadership, global leadership, in bringing attention to the Boat People refugees and his successful effort to change American policy and allow for the rescue of the Boat People refugees from Vietnam seeking to live in freedom in America. After the dramatic events in Geneva at the UN Conference on the Boat People, and we returned to Des Moines, the next event was a stunning one, the visit of Pope John Paul II, who had come to Living History Farm on October 4th. The governor was in charge of the public safety features of this visit and turned to me as the member of his staff who coordinated the work of the state police, state patrol, Iowa National Guard. I in turn designated Colonel Harold Thompson to lead the effort in coordinating all of our efforts that would be to make it possible for about 350,000 people, larger than the whole population of the city of Des Moines in 1979, to be able to come on this fall day, assemble at Living History Farm, and then go home safely and peacefully. Colonel Thompson came up with a great plan, included shutting down the interstate highways, making them parking lot for buses, but it worked amazingly. And the visit, because I flew in the helicopter with Governor Ray, we landed on the hill, our helicopter next to the one that had brought the Holy Father there. And I remember being there and witnessing this incredible spectacle. But there were three aspects of that day that I remember now 40 years later in looking back, that sunny day when the Pope made his pilgrimage first to Cumming, to a small country church, St. Patrick's Church, and then to the hill at Living History Farm. The first was that it was an event not just for Catholics who were followers of the Pope, but there was an interfaith prayer service. And the Pope stood on the hill with the Catholic Bishop of Des Moines, but also a Protestant bishop and a Jewish rabbi, and they prayed together, bringing together major faiths represented in our state and our community. Secondly, when the Pope began to celebrate the Mass, and the Catholic followers brought the gifts to him in a pageant, a solemn procession of Catholic followers, and among them, dressed in their native garb, were Vietnamese refugees, wearing bright red and blue áo dài, the long flowing robe, traditional robe of the Vietnamese people. And it was so symbolic of the fact that here were these Catholic refugees who had come from Vietnam just a few years earlier, seeking freedom, to live in freedom and not under communism, and had found a home in Iowa. And the third thing I remembered from that day was the Pope himself when he gave his homily, when he addressed the crowd standing on the hill and was blessing them. And he talked about how the farmers in rural America were the stewards of these great gifts that God had given us, and how it was our obligation to preserve them and protect them, and at the same time to use them to feed the millions and millions and millions who are hungry in the world. This would be a message that would resonate decades later, and I would call attention to it again and again as there were disputes between those who were opposed to certain agricultural practices and those others who were in favor of them. But in 1979, it was a powerful message that the 350,000 plus people took away from that event. After the Pope departed, just a few weeks later in late October, I would go with Governor Ray. We would journey to China, as was the U.S. and China had just established diplomatic relations. I met the paramount leader, Deng Xiaoping, had amazing opportunity for a young American diplomat to actually converse with him about the Khmer Rouge, the genocidal murderers whom he condemned to me. And then Governor Ray led the delegation to Thailand, where we would visit the refugee camp at Sa Kaeo and see 30,000 of the victims of the Cambodian genocide assembled there in the most incredible, terrible situation, that dying 50 to 100 a day, their bodies being bulldozed into mass graves. And Governor Ray, the photographer who had photographed the crowd at the Pope's visit from his helicopter, now took photos there. And on the plane trip back to the United States, all that he and Mrs. Ray and the other 5 governors who were with him, all we could talk about was this incredible, devastating scene that we had witnessed. And when we landed in Des Moines in the evening, early November, we were met there by a young reporter from the Des Moines Register named David Yepsen. And he had his pad out and his pen and taking notes and asking Governor Ray about what he had seen. And the governor was describing this terrible humanitarian disaster that beyond anything any of us had seen. And Yepsen, the reporter, asks the Governor Ray, "Do you have any photos of it?" And the governor reached into his bag and brought out this handful of rolls, little yellow rolls of Kodak film that were already exposed but not developed. And he was holding them there to show Yepsen that he didn't have any photos yet to give him. And Yepsen asked the question a good reporter would ask, "Can we have the film? Can the Des Moines Register have your photos?" It's a question hard to imagine many politicians these days, or even in those days, who would just hand over their film to a newspaper reporter. And there was a moment of hesitation as I was standing there watching Governor Ray when he was thinking about it. And because of the respect that he had for the Des Moines Register, for David Yepsen, he handed him the film. Yepsen would take those rolls of film back to the Register. They'd be developed that evening, and the next morning, as the Des Moines Register edition hit the streets all over the state, the headline said, "I watched people die, Ray." And next to it was this large picture, this large photo of this pathetic-looking Cambodian, obviously in incredible distress, emaciated, starved, suffering. Photo of that person he had seen. And this image spread across the state and would lead to one of the finest and greatest humanitarian moments in the history of the state of Iowa, and a program called Iowa Shares.